nanapua o Hawaii Tupa ama hope o ka aina Iki mai ka elele.
Aloha and welcome to the Hawaiian National Broadcast Corporation's program called Kaleo o Napoe. We are listening to the voices of the people of Hawaii as they respond to the Department of Interior's inquiry with regards to what action should be taken in forming, or as they say, reestablishing a nation-to-nation relationship between the United States government and the native Hawaiian community. It's a term already loaded with issues, and I'm not going to get into those particular issues. We do have a guest who has spoken before that inquiry, and this is Paula Aila. Welcome to the program.
Aloha. Thank you.
You know, I had listened to your testimony, and there were some significant points you made. One was a matter of time frame. How much longer must we wait? The second was, what is the role of trust or ali organizations, and perhaps they should be stepping up. And the third was the fractionalizing of the community by organizations who purport to represent all of the Hawaiians, and yet you as an individual do not feel that they represent you. Which point would you want to start with?
We can start with the timeline that I introduced my testimony with. So basically, I feel that this has been a generational timeline. What I mentioned was I'm into the 7th generation now of this discussion. 2 of my generations in my family have passed. My mom is 85, and so the fight has been going on, the conversation has been going on for generations now. And I think that it's time to just move the discussion forward. For example, the 1993 apology, which I marched in. It's time to finish that discussion so we can go into the next phase of planning for the nation and the next discussion.
Let's talk about the timeline first, and then we can move to how we shut the door on that discussion. And we go back to 1893, a period of time in which the United States landed their troops. 165 Blue Jackets landed in peaceful Honolulu, as it was described in the Blunt Report. And so is that where we start the timeline as we start moving the progression of occupation and then what I consider to be the colonization process in Hawaii?
In my opinion, and my research, and I think it started before that. 1893 is a significant date. By no means is it the start, in my opinion, of the timeline. I think it starts with Western influence, whether it's English or U.S. It starts to reshape our culture and the way we think, the way we do things, our behaviors, and the whole assimilation factor, I think, started before 1893.
I would agree that the assimilation aspect started before that period of time. The missionaries arrived, even before that Cook arrives. But I wonder about the imposition of the idea of self-determination and sovereignty during that period of time, because all people will move along with time. And so I don't know if it's appropriate to start a timeline of the taking away of one's self-determination as early as that, because it was still our kings and queens who but anyway, we can have different views on that, but we both agree.
I see your point. It's a valid point. And so the 1893, as I mentioned, is a significant point, and that's what we tend to talk about these days, right? In our, I call it recent history, because it is very recent. So I think I was referring to an earlier timeline because of my ancestors before me and the change that started leading up to self-determination. We were a self-determined entity prior to Western contact. And so I think that there's a transition that happened there and then up to 1893, when, in my opinion, it was a forced taking over.
So at that point in time, 1893 and after, we didn't really have control of our future, and it was manipulated or controlled by a foreigner. And as to that, it seems that is what the real underlying issue is at the present time.
I believe so. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Let's look at the major phases of that timeline. During the period of the overthrow, Liliuokalani's death in just before the 1920s, and then new eras or new generations with different mentality. But one of the things that happened was the loss of language, the loss of the national consciousness. What happened to that national consciousness, the understanding that the nation continues to exist, although the government operation itself may not exist?
Yeah. That's a difficult question to answer. I guess in my view, it's in our koko, right? No matter what changes we faced, what difficulties, what opportunities, it's a part of our koko. And I live and breathe it every day. So I don't know that that's ever been taken away from us. I think the way in which we live our lives on a day-to-day basis is what we struggle with.
If we look back at just that period of time, some people have identified as trauma or the post-traumatic syndrome. Having depended so much on the honesty, integrity of the United States and all the great principles that they supposedly had brought to Hawaii, and yet in the protest against the takeover, against the annexation, and to see that the United States would take these steps to just wipe out the self-determination, the Hawaiian people became so traumatized that they did go into hiding or became silent and didn't want to talk about it. They were tired.
I mean, one way I look at it is the word I have used is paralysis, right? Something happens, and to your point, it's trauma, it's paralysis, and you kind of don't know, okay, now what? You know, if I go here, I get in trouble. If I do this, if I say this, I get in trouble. And those stories have been told to me from my tutu, right? And so they lived through that, and I think that part of that timeline makes me sad. Because as my tutu on my father's side held on to his Hawaiian language, never spoke English unless he was forced to, absolutely. But today in my household, we don't speak the language. I don't have anyone to speak it with. So I think that paralysis in that timeline makes me sad. And I think that's what a lot of people today struggle with. Like, how could that have happened to us? We're such a strong people. Right? And so it's like, how could that have been, you know, like we didn't just give it away, but somehow it was moved from us.
Or the conditions around us were created such that we had to go along with the Americanization of Hawaii.
Right. And that's sad to me.
So having suffered through that, and as you say, it's been too long for us to begin to recover our self-determination. We've seen the loss of language. We've seen the loss of even our national consciousness. Many of us have not fully understood the fact of the overthrow until more recently. And having gone through all of that, those experiences, what you are calling for is, well, let's get on the ball and start moving ahead. What do you mean by that, and what ideas do you think we should be following to make that move ahead?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is this is not a new discussion. And then when I speak about a generational discussion, it's something that Congress, state, city legislators, our trustees within the OHA entity, they've had decades, in some cases, in the case of OHA, some have had generations to address and resolve the questions that are coming up now. And my question is, don't make it sound like it's a new discussion, because it's not a new discussion. We are at the point where we need to close off some of these questions, i.e. the apology. You know, what happened with that? It was something that, you know, was done, but it just kind of sits out there. So when are we going to close off that discussion so we can move to the next question that we need to answer?
Let me share a story with you. It comes from South Africa. It's a Mandela story. If you heard it before, well, too bad.
Okay. I'll listen again.
And it deals with two boys who were very good friends. One boy had a bicycle, the other boy did not have a bicycle. So one day, the boy with the bicycle finds that his bicycle is lost. Somebody took his bicycle. So a few months later, the second boy comes to him and say, you know, I really needs to relieve this burden from me. I did something that I've been carrying this burden. I've not been well since this event, and you are the only person who can assist me in relieving that burden. You need to listen to me and then forgive me. So the second boy innocently says, well, what is it? And you tell me first, and then, okay, I'll forgive you. So the first boy says, you know your bicycle? I stole your bicycle. So the second boy says, okay. And so the thieving boy says, and now I ask you to forgive me. So the other one says, okay, I forgive you. So the boy who stole a bicycle gets up and says, thanks, sir. I feel much better now. Thank you very much. And then begins to walk away. So the first boy says, hey, by the way, where's my bicycle? So what you're saying is that an apology itself is not good enough. You have to return the item that was taken.
Yes. And that's part of what I was trying to address is you started that discussion, so let's finish it, right? And part of it is returning of assets, all of the billions of dollars that go along with that by not having that available, it's hurt our community, right? Because it's in the hands of other people that are deciding. It's a control factor, in my opinion, and I object to that.
So it's like the boy who stole a bicycle saying, okay, I'll return it to you, but you can only use it on Mondays and Wednesdays, and the rest is for me.
It's like, what's the point, right? If you're going to do it wholeheartedly and be pono about it. You know what you did, correct it. End of story on that one.
Some of the questions are, how do we get there? What are the details? And rather than going into that, because that will be a much longer discussion, my question to you is, what do you envision? How do you see Hawaii at the end of that transaction?
Yeah, I don't know, honestly, if I have a response for that. I mean, I have thoughts in terms of, I see this time frame for our community in working with entities like local entities like OHA or the Department of Interior. I see it as a transition, right? In a transition, in my opinion, you don't have all the answers, but you start to sit around the table and try to address some of that together, right? It's not one person at the table dictating what the end result will be. So long term, I hope for my children and my grandchildren to have home ownership, education fully funded because the monies are there, financial literacy because that's just a part of the Western world. You know, we can't escape it. And in order to be successful, you need to have that type of education.
So you're speaking of a vision of not moving back into time, but as you move forward into time, you're better prepared. You're not saying that we are splitting modernity from tradition, but integrating modernity into our future Hawaii, but still maintaining that element of self-determination in which we decide where we go.
Yeah, and that's part of it is I don't feel that we can just cut the cord. Right? That would be too drastic. That would be too devastating, in my opinion, for our community and for my children and my grandchildren. So this transition phase that I keep talking about is to move us. We already know certain things. We know the facts, right? We know who we are. It's in our blood. But how do we take all of those assets and then move it through the transition? Right? What do we want for our children? We always talk about what we want for our children. It's a very Hawaiian thing, right? How do we pass it on to them? So that's what I want for my children. I want a quality, for me, it's a quality of life issue, right? It's not keeping us paralyzed. It's not moving us back. It's how do we benefit our future? And so my point to the Department of Interior is that the resources are there to do all of those things. Education is key. right? But we also need the freedom to choose what's right for our families and for our community. I'm kind of over the dictate, we dictate what you can do. And so the fences that we touched on earlier is where the trust comes in that I mentioned earlier.
So as I'm listening and trying to imagine your description, what you're saying is current conditions need to be addressed. Education, health, finances, all of those things need to be improved for the Hawaiians. And yet, we cannot lose sight of the underlying principle of self-determination, that we control these factors. And as we move forward, we're not just going to stay in the present condition, but we also want to move towards an independent nation.
Independence, I don't have a clear definition of that for myself yet. I'm still trying to figure that out. So that's a discussion I'm having in my own head. I don't know what independence is yet. So, and again, I say that's part of my transition, right? To find those answers and put myself in a place, put my family in a place that's comfortable for us, not dictated by others. Yeah.
I want to thank you very much for this conversation, and perhaps we can continue with more of these discussions at another time.
Absolutely.
Okay, mahalo. We have been talking with Paula Aila, and we are on the grounds of Nanaikapono Elementary School, and we will continue with our discussions. We are produced by the Hawaiian National Broadcast Corporation. We'll be back.
Kaulana nā pua o Hawaii, Tūpa'a mahope o ka aina, Iki mai ka elele o ka loko i